Click it.
Pretty funny.
Welcome everybody and everyone who will be viewing this later, because I believe we have a lot more folks viewing later than we do viewing now, but it's good to see some faces. So it is August 18th, 2022, and this is the sixth meeting of the weekly Zoom meeting of the weekly Common Law Conversations group. We're probably going to be changing our name to Uncommon Law Conversations because nothing that we are doing is being done by anyone else, short of a very few folks out there. So the first thing I want to address a few things, and then we're going to open up to questions if anybody has any questions, but I got a few things here. And there's someone on our Facebook group who posted a question, several questions, and I went backwards and forth. I feel bad about how I responded. So I'm going to delve into what he brought up on the Facebook group, and we'll cover a bunch of different points starting the assumed name certificate and various activities thereof with our backwards and forth. First off, I'm probably not telling anybody that's joined us here anything new, and maybe no one in our group, but especially the regulars, but things aren't they have always been, especially if you're my age. I'm almost 50 years old. I was born in 74 and I grew up in the 80s. I joined the military in the 90s, and I watched this world because I saw a lot of the world through my father's eyes. My father was born in 1926. So I had firsthand stories of the Great Depression. I knew what folks went through then because I heard it from folks who went through it. Also, I had secondhand stories of the Civil War because my grandparents were all born in the 1800s. It seems everyone in my family they bear children or have father children. I don't know about the mothers, but the fathers usually have father children at a late stage in life. I was born when my father was 49 and 48, somewhere in there. I have a brother who was born when my father was in his mid 50s. So if you go to my great grandparents, you're going back to before the Civil War. And I know I had at least one great grandparent who was in the Civil War, uncle or something like that. So I got a lot of stories growing up. And I can tell you that the world we see right now is quite different from the world we were provided in 1970, 1980, and maybe even what we were led to believe was the world in 1990. It's going downhill quickly. And in 2007, 2008, our financial system pretty much crashed. The banking crash, the housing bubble being burst was actually a huge land grab by the banks. Now, what they're doing is enslaving folks further and further and further. And that's the point of democracy. Democracy is geared, it is rigged to enslave folks further and further and further. Everybody talks about how money is an important thing to the controllers. It's not. They print the money. Power is what's important to them. And once you get to the top of the hierarchy, what you find out is that your life energy, i.e. your soul, is what's important to them. We are surrounded by principalities and powers, and the things that are going on around us, 99% of it we can't even see, but we can see the residual effects of it. And one of the things that we see is that our quality of life is going down quick. You can no longer raise a family on one income. You have to have two, and sometimes three. Folks are losing their homes to foreclosures at a rate. Right now, they're pushing folks to get a 30-year mortgage because most mortgages are set up on a 30-year loan, and 30 years is a long time for us humans, for us men and women. So you'll notice that it is much cheaper now to purchase a home, pay a mortgage, than it is to rent. I have a friend who recently was in the rental market, and most things are $1,200 and $1,400 and $1,500, at least here in Kentucky. And you can purchase a home and pay a mortgage on something a lot cheaper, although greed is also starting to step in. Zillow is hiding, in many cases on their listings, the history for what homes sold for. So, you can find out that the home is being sold for $280,000 now. What you can't see is that the owner before last sold it in 1997 for $35,000. They don't want that information out there because everything's being so hyperinflated and everyone's jumping on the bandwagon. Every small business person that I've talked to says all their supplies are going up. they're raising their prices, and this is all manufactured. We all know this. This is not an accident, and this is the reason for the system that we're in, that was started in 1913 on Jekyll Island off the coast of Georgia with the Federal Reserve System. And that system is designed entirely and wholly by Satan. So things are going downhill, and there is a way out. You have to know who you are. And by knowing who you are and knowing how to engage in commerce without confusing yourself with the name, you can get out from underneath a lot of things that people who have not figured this stuff out and who do not know who they are burdened with. And I can tell you that when you're dealing with government, the liabilities always outweigh the benefits, always. So when you register your kid, certificate of live birth, so that you can get that small tax deduction, you are losing the rights to your child. So the benefits always outweigh the liabilities. So I think we can all look around the world and we know that things are not what we're told. The rules that we were provided to work within are not working. I'm talking to folks 40 years old who are living with their parents because they have played by the rules and now they have crushing debt and they have no property. It's not uncommon at all. I've talked to folks who are 40 years old who have college debt from 1990. It's amazing how that stuff just lags on and on and on. And now that the college debts have been federalized, you can't discharge them in bankruptcy. Or at least that's what we're told. So there are a lot of things that we can resolve by knowing who we are, because all of this stuff that we're obligating ourselves to, all of these liabilities are caused by us not knowing who we are. They're caused by us being separated from God. And once you start understanding who you are and moving closer to the Creator, a lot of these things that you're labeling problems right now will go away with some work. And the only way you can interact with the public, of course, is through paperwork. The democracy exists entirely on paper. Everything is on paper. That's why no matter what you do, there's a form involved, or a court recorder, or some kind of transcript, or a license. It's all written. If we were to dissolve all paper and written word and electronic written words, the democracy would pretty much cease to exist. It is not people and buildings. It is the written word. So when you interact with the public, you're going to have to interact with documents. That is just the nature of the beast. The first thing that we have to learn is to separate ourselves from commerce. That's not easy to do. With the paperwork and the filings, it's easy to do, but in our head, it's not. We have been inundated from birth with the ideal that we are that all caps first, middle, last name. And we are not. That is a trust. It's a business. And by calling yourself the owner, you've been committing fraud. And that's where all of our liabilities come from. So one of the things I've recognized and that we've recognized that we need over the past few weeks is a funnel. When people join our group or people discover us, they need to be directed to certain resources so that we don't have to repeat ourselves over and over and over to the new folks. It's very exhausting. And I'm not going to quit doing it, but at the same time, we've got to design a better way for folks to learn this stuff and to learn who they are, because that's ultimately my top goal. My goal is not to get you out of your mortgage. It's not to help you with the credit cards. It's not to help you with the CPS issue. It's not to help you with the family court issue. It's not to help you with the criminal issue. It's to help folks figure out who they are, because it's kind of like attending to someone who's having medical trauma. You know, you can, if someone's bleeding, I mean, you can cauterize the wound, but it does you no good unless you find the source of the bleeding, right? Sometimes it requires going deep inside to figure out where all the blood's coming from or what caused it in the first place. And until we get to the root of the problem, you can't solve the problem. So you can take someone who thinks they're the all caps name and you can give them the right paperwork and you can tell them what to say, but it's almost like giving someone who's hungry a fish. You can either give them a fish and solve their immediate problem, or you can teach them to fish and they'll be self-sufficient. And my goal is to teach people to fish. So we had someone on the group who ask the question, and they're a recent member of the group, and we have this a lot. Folks jump in. They haven't done any research. They haven't watched the videos. Although this person I found out later did watch a couple of videos, and I missed that part in our exchange in the comment section. And they asked, what the ANC stood for. With that, I knew that by asking that question, that they had not familiarized themselves with any of my writings or any of the videos. First off, I want to make it quite clear that I didn't discover any of this. This is not my stuff. I am spearheading a lot of what it's being done because I've learned about what has already been done in regards to registration of the name. So I've learned of the tool. Using the tool and progressing on into commerce with it is another matter entirely. I have found no one that is given a checklist for doing the various things like getting a business bank account or how to sign your name or how to sign a contract or how to handle driving without a license or how to handle an offer from a entity who identifies themselves as a government agency, like, I don't know, local police department, state police, federal courts, those sorts of things. With those things pretty much on our own to figure these things out ourselves. And a lot of it has to do with how close you are to God, how close you are to knowing who you are, because someone can teach you what the rules of the ball game are. But when it comes time to get on the court and play ball, you are in battle. And so there's going to be multiple options for any one particular problem. And so if we can teach folks who they are, then everything should flow naturally from there. We also have to delve into some other things like the 3-part administrative process and how to perfect a claim and those sorts of things. But as we move along in this, I'm posting what I'm doing. I'm posting the paperwork as I become successful. And as I screw up, I'm posting that too. So I'll be sharing the stuff that I'm doing, which gets me to the idea of skin in the game. Usually when you find a so-called guru online, they have very little skin in the game. I remember paying to be on a Zoom call about a year and a half ago, and the fellow was advocating how to do what's called 1099A. There's a lot of folks out there, especially with all the economic pressure, who think that they can get things by filing the right IRS forms. I tried that because I had a partner at the time who was pushing me to try that, and didn't see any evidence that it worked. It's all confusing. I really don't enjoy sitting down and filling out long, involved, detailed IRS forms. And unfortunately, with the 1099A process, you have to get the party that you're buying from to participate, and they just don't want to do it because it probably should work. It actually has a lot of merit to it, but it just doesn't seem to. And I think that's probably a lot of that just comes from the fact that a lot of that's going to be out of greed, because imagine what would happen if the government allowed everybody who filed a certain form to buy a car or a house without any type of liability. Pretty soon the government would shrink really quickly, and the system must protect itself. Keep that in mind for when you want to go lean up a judge or lean up a cop. You better have effected a claim against those entities, because in order for the system to continue to exist, it must protect itself. Think about what happens in nature to those things which don't protect themselves. They die, or they're eaten by other entities, other animals. So the system must protect itself. So we need a funnel to get folks involved in this and to get them through certain basic training. You don't want to go back there. But there needs to be certain things that we require folks to go view or watch. And those things need to be organized. And frankly, these Zoom calls aren't organized. And that's okay. That's how I learned about a lot of this stuff, is listening to audios and videos of folks who were just on a radio show talking backwards and forth. The individual who is responsible for what you may call discovering all this with the registering of the name is a fellow named Douglas Joseph Heurich. And I know that's a first, middle, last name. It's Douglas Joseph of the Heurich family. But he was on a radio talk show in
Nevada.
It was in Nevada. It's in a little town called Pahrump, Nevada. Puhrump, I think, on a radio station called Freedom Radio. And I'm sure they're an independent radio station. Otherwise, they would not have been allowed to broadcast what they broadcast. So it's 7 videos, which are actually audios, not really videos, where folks went backwards and forth. And then after that, I dug into some stuff that was done by a couple, a man and wife couple, who are living in California, and they have a YouTube channel called The Human Frequency, and they do a lot of stuff that I just don't get into right now, or at least not yet. What's that stuff called?
Organite.
Organite. They get into Organite. That's their main thing. But they got into the student certificate, and they put skin in the game. They started driving without tags, and they started minimizing their lifestyle.
Are they the
and-
ones that use the ANC to have make YouTube put their videos back up that had
Yes.
been taken down?
Yeah, they had a video taken down, and they notified the CEO of YouTube on registration of the name. They sent them the appropriate paperwork and let them know that if they didn't put the video back up, that they were being harmed, and that they would pursue remedy against the CEO's person. And YouTube put the video back up. So there's your answer to censorship. Now they've since started putting their new material elsewhere other than YouTube, because YouTube is becoming so censored that it doesn't matter who you are. It's a pain in the butt to work with anymore. And my stuff's on YouTube right now, but I have no doubt that at some point in the near future, it won't be, especially once they figure out what it is that I'm sharing, because I've had multiple persons, I'm talking no less than 8, who've come to me and said, Bill, please be careful with what you're sharing, because we're worried about what might happen to you. Well, I'm not so worried about that. If the government wants to offer me, that's fine. I don't think they're going to offer me for what I'm offering, because what I'm offering is for folks to stay within the law. ANC is not some extra law, extra statute thing where you're acting against government. It is their laws that require you to register a fictitious business name. What happens after that, though, is stuff that they really don't want to happen, because if everybody did it, if everybody registered their legal name and knew what they were doing, you can't just, I mean, it's one thing for me to give you a hammer, but if you don't know that it's used to drive in nails, you're not going to build anything with it. But if everyone in the US did that, government would probably shrink by about 95% in a very short period of time, days. So where we're at now is we have a lot of folks who are starting to see this stuff, but I am absolutely convinced that if someone is not close to truth, if they're not close to God, if they're not seeking to know who they are, this stuff won't work for them, because they'll just disregard it. I've seen people who entered their name over a year ago, 2 years ago, and they've never used it. And then they get pulled back into it when they encounter an issue that is putting them into some type of perceived jeopardy, like a bench warrant or the potential loss of their home through foreclosure. That's not unusual. That's the way truth works. A lot of us were introduced to the word of God at a very early age, but then there was all this fiction thrown over top of it that made us think it was something other than what it was. And usually it takes a crucible where we get put into a spot where we're facing a lot of pressure on multiple sides before we actually turn back to the truth. And I've heard people say God will never give you more than what you can handle. That's crap. God will give you far more than you can handle until you finally are crushed and turn towards Him. That is the point where things will start getting easier. Now, that doesn't mean that all your issues get resolved. If your legs get cut off in a crash, there's probably no amount of prayer that will reattach them. Although we are told that faith as small as a mustard seed can move mountains, most of us don't have that sort of faith, but it's something we can always strive, because as long as we're in the realm, we're imperfect and we'll continue to improve. So with that said, I had an individual, a man, on the Facebook group who asked a question, and it was kind of couched within a lot of conversation. So I may have missed his original intent, or maybe I didn't, and I just overlooked it because it's a long week. But though incidentally, I've met several people from our group over the past week. One fellow brought his daughter, and a friend who brought 5 or 6 of his kids. Before that, we got to meet with a wonderful woman who was from all the way across the country. And it's been a very interesting week. It's fun. It's always fun meeting folks who are from the group who are like-minded, which also brings me to the idea that if you have folks in your life who are into this stuff, as you involve yourself in this stuff more and more, by this stuff, I mean contracts and all the things that we talk about in the group, you'll find more and more of your social circle will be made up of folks who are like-minded. 4 years ago, I didn't hardly know anybody that even thought about contracts. It was all my self-study. Now, most everyone in my phone contact list is at least familiar with the thing we just in the group. So if you don't have a social circle that can support you in this stuff, then by all means, start making connections. I guarantee you, if you're in our group, there's someone near you. I've talked to folks in our group who are from a lot of folks from Arizona and Texas, but there's folks in there from Norway. There's folks in there from New Zealand, Czechoslovakia.
Well, the two fellows that came this week, one of them was at a celebration of life during COVID, and then over the mask thing, because he wouldn't wear a mask, ended up standing outside, and there's other people standing outside without, and that struck the conversation, because really COVID, is, for all its negatives, one of the positives that I found is you really find out who your people are. I mean, all through the whole thing, you walk into the store and you can look around and you know who your people are, because they're the ones not
without a mask on.
masks.
Right. It's suddenly very easy to recognize kindred souls. So the question came, and I'm just going to read a few of the comments so that you guys can kind of follow along, because there's a lot of good stuff in this. He says, the way I've learned it for years is that the all caps name, or the first, middle, last name, is a trust, a CSK trust. You are the beneficiary of that trust, and the court is the trustee, but they want you to think it's the other way around. Okay, so look at the part of that. Is the all caps first, middle, last name a trust? Yes, it is. All business entities in our current environment are trusts. There's in trust law, you have, the way I usually do it is I put up a triangle, and at the top I put executor, at the lower right I put trustee, and in the lower left I put beneficiary. Now with the public trust, which is the all caps first, middle, last name, the government is the executor. That's why they can set rules like you can't drive more than 45 miles an hour on this road. The executor sets the rules for the trustee. Who is the trustee on the government side? It is us, the folks who hold driver's licenses and are confused and think that we are the first, middle, last name. And if somebody points to that name, picture on the driver's license and says, is this you? We dumbly say, yes, that's me. And we open ourselves up to tons of liability. And then the trustee holds the property and acts with the property for the benefit of the beneficiary. Who is the beneficiary on the government side? The government. So the government holds two positions in a trust, and that's very possible. One entity can hold two positions in a trust. They just can't hold all three, or else the trust collapses because you're not trusting anybody. So on the public side, the government is the executor and the beneficiary. They're the beneficiary because when you pay a fine, they're the ones that get the money, even though there's no money. So we are the trustee. What is a trustee? It's an employee. What do trustees and employees do? They do what they're told. But it switches when you flip to the private side, the republic. In the republic, we are the executors. Well, we're not the executors until we turn 14. Our parents are the executors until we turn 14. That's why your parents can tell you to clean your room. Once we turn 14, we've hit what's called the age of majority. That's what I believe anyway, and it's supported by a lot of common law writings that I've seen. And so once we hit 14, we've hit the age of majority, and we were expected to be able to act in commerce ourselves at age 14 in 1777. That individual, man or woman, was considered to be able to be liable in contracts. Now you get over to man's law, and it's a reflection. It's a mere reflection because the government is our trustee in the republic. We created government for our benefit because we needed them to do the things that we didn't want to do over and over and over. But we're the beneficiary because we benefit from all this. But when you flip over to the government side, the democracy, then all the positions flip. The government is the executor and beneficiary, and we're the trustee. So yes, it is a trust. Now it says they want you to think it the way around, and a lot of folks think that they can claim the position of beneficiary, or the position of beneficiary and executor with the all caps first, middle, last name. I'm not going to pursue that. I've seen people pursue that, and I don't see any clean cut way to present that in court. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it works. There's a lot of things that work. There's one way to skin a cat, as my dad used to tell me, but that's not something I'm interested in pursuing because I pursued it at one point and it just doesn't resonate. So I'm not pursuing it. I think what we're doing with the ANC is a shortcut. It is the undoing of what was done with the certificate of live birth. Now, the next thing that came up was anything you do with that trust that imparts ownership is fraud. And this is what I was saying. Anything that you do with that trust that imparts ownership is fraud and will be a source of liability. I think that's true. And the response was trusts don't have owners. Technically, they have three positions. Both those statements are true. Trusts don't have owners. They have three positions. So the problem isn't we're confused who owns the name. The problem is we think we own the name. The government created that name. They have control over that name, the most control. The creator always gets the benefit of the creation. And the government created that first, middle, last name. Now, yes, they used what was on the application, the SS5, and we converted it when our mothers changed our given name and our surname, which would be, in my case, William Ernest is my given name, and Farrell is my surname or family name. It was converted to a legal name with a SS5 form, an application for a Social Security card, by moving those names around and making a first, middle, last name, which really doesn't exist. Then the next thing came up was there are a lot of people that think that there's an executor in a trust, but there doesn't seem to be. Executors are only in wills. Well, that's not true. There's many trusts out there, and all trusts have executors. You have to have an executorship position, and that's always the entity that sets the rules. Who sets the rules for the all caps name? The government. If you open up an LLC or an S corp or any other type of business entity within the public, the government exerts control over that. I usually just for shortcut purposes say ownership. English is a very crap language, so it's easier to say the government owns it, but really they control it. Okay. And in this system, we don't own anything, nothing. Men and women cannot own anything in this system. We actually couldn't own anything before this system because everything was owned by God. And now that we're in the system, every single law, every single statute, every ordinance, and every executive order is there for one purpose only. It is to protect assets. That's it. Even a law against rape is there to protect an asset because the body of the woman belongs to the name, and I'm just going to say belongs to the government. Now, does that mean that they own it? Well, they have control over it. That's for sure because they set the rules for it. And if you're operating under the all caps name and you're doing so legally and have it registered the name and you're claiming that you are the name, then yes, your body belongs to the name, which is why in Kentucky, when an arrest warrant goes out, it usually reads something like this, or at least it did back when I was in police work. It said, all law enforcement officers within the Commonwealth of Kentucky are hereby ordered to bring before this honorable court the body of, and then they would give an all caps name, first, middle, last name. The body of, what does of do? It denotes ownership, the wallet of Bill Farrell, whose wallet? It's Bill Farrell's wallet. The body of the all caps name. So the body belongs to the all caps name. Everything in the republic or the democracy is a mirror image of the republic or the private. Therefore, you own your name in the private. The name's you in the public. And by controlling the name, they control. You actually pledge yourself as surety. You pledge your body as surety for the debts obliged by the all caps name in the public. And that's what's happening. That's why you can put a bond in place, and that bond can be surety instead of your body, which is why you can get out of jail by posting a bond. So when you register the name, though, you're throwing a wrench into their system. They never expected us to do this. So here was the next little bit of, we went backwards and forth. It says, if you don't own the name, then how are you registering it? Well, you don't have to own something to register it. I can register Courtney's car in Georgia. I don't own the car. Actually, Courtney doesn't either, but we won't get into that. But I can register the car that she has a certificate of title from in Georgia, as long as I have the appropriate paperwork. You don't have to own something to register it. So what's happening with the ANC? With the ANC, you are, let's do this. Let's look at the definition of register. Register. This is according to Black's Law 6. Register, to record formally and exactly, to enroll, to enter precisely in a list or the like, to make correspond exactly one with another, to fit correctly in a relative position, to be in correct alignment one with another, to be in correct alignment one with another. So what is being told to us here when we register the name? When you got the name, it was given to you under the presumption you weren't going to use it to do business. Now, they knew we would, and they knew we'd create a bunch of liability with this, and they understood what they were doing, and we won't get into who they is. But it's just a convenient way to say this. So the controllers, the elite, the folks that plan this, Satan, however you want to put it. So when we turn 18, or in some cases 16, because that's when we first run down to the DMV and get our driver's license, right? Or the entity's driver's license. When we turned 16, 18, whatever, we started using the name, but we did not notify the government that we were going to use the name. We just took it and ran with it. And that's a little bit like me being handed Courtney's birth certificate and saying, here, you can use this thing right here, engage in commerce if at some future point you would like to. But I never tell her that I'm going to. I just start acting in commerce with it. And she comes back to find that I've purchased 3 homes, 2 businesses, and a farm. And I have a ton of debt on it. And she never found that I was going to use that name for business. She said, well, I gave it to you as an empty vessel. You're the one that filled it up without me knowing about it. So we need to tell the government that we're going to be doing business with the name. Why? Because it's the law. If you look up assumed name laws, fictitious name laws in every single state, you will find that you are required to register any fictitious name under which you do business. We don't own it, but we need to let them know that we're using it. By registering it, we're not giving it away because it's not ours anyway. By registering it, we get a government document back that shows that we are not the name. It shows a separation between us, the living men and women, and the name. And the only state through which you can do that is Minnesota. They closed the doors the past 15 or 20 years in every single state. Yes, I know I'm repeating a lot of this because it needs repeating. I listen to a lot of these videos that I listen to, audios over and over and over. I know Courtney did. I know her kids did. I know the people that we've been friends with have listened to these things over and over and over because we're hungry for this stuff. And it's just like reading scripture. When you get into truth, the more you expose yourself to it, the more you learn.
And repetition.
And repetition.
And each time you hear something, sometimes like with the audios, you pick up something different that you didn't the first time around. Like I've heard things and thought, I don't remember that from the last time I listened to it.
And which video had the most ahas?
7.
And if you don't know what we're talking about, maybe you should drop me a message and I'll let you in on it. So I've never turned away anyone who comes to me wanting more info. I'll give you more info. So if you don't own the name, how are you registering? With their forms, with their portals, with their website, with their tools. That's how we're registering it.
So Abby says most other common law people that she follows, they don't use the term register. They say when we're born, we register our name. So aren't we unregistering?
No. No, to unregister, you would have to collapse that CSKV public trust, seems to me. So if you were going to unregister it, you would have to undo what was done.
It's kind of like unregistering your driver's license.
Yeah.
Sort of. But it'd be way more complicated to have to.
Yeah, you would have to collapse the trust. And here's the problem with collapsing the trust. So let's take a vehicle, for instance. Let's say Courtney wants to sell me her truck. And so we go down to the courthouse and we go inside where they handle such matters. And she signed the title. What has she just done? She has accepted the title. And then she hands it back to the DMV. Now, keep in mind, it's not really the title. The title was what was produced by the manufacturer when they manufactured the vehicle. It's called the manufacturer's certificate of origin, MCO. And if you go to a new car lot and purchase a new car, and you pay cash, or use credits or whatever, and you walk out of there without financing the vehicle, you can request to take the MCO with you. They're going to want you to sign a document that allows them to have, what's the word? When you sign a document that is a legal, like I give you a document that says you can go open a bank account in my name. It's a power of attorney. Power of attorney. They'll get you to sign a limited power of attorney so that they can register the vehicle in your name. Just don't sign that, because once you sign it, you're giving them the power to register the vehicle. Ask for CO as condition of the sale. Carry it off with you. Now, I know that in California, they've tried to make that impossible by making a law against it, but I've never done it. I have seen MCOs, but not for vehicles. I've got an MCO for a trailer, because when I purchased the trailer, they gave me the MCO, which works the same way with vehicles. I have seen MCOs for vehicles because there are a few folks out there who have purchased a vehicle and taken the MCO with them, in which case the vehicles then will never get put into a state database, and there'll never be confusion about who owns the vehicle. They have no power over the vehicle. But let's say that the MCO went to the state from the dealership, and now she owns the vehicle, or she'll be sent a certificate of title. She won't be given a title. She'll be given a certificate of title, certificate of birth. Get it? It's not a birth certificate. It's a certificate of birth. Well, it's a certificate of title. She takes the certificate of title down to the DMV. She signs it, hands it back to them. At that point, she just collapsed the trust. The government has no more power over that vehicle. But what do I do at that very moment? I create a new trust by filling out an application for title. And then I ask the government once again to be the executor over that vehicle. And by registering it, you are giving it to them, and they give it back to you and let you use it for a small fee every year. And the fee is called a vehicle tax. And that vehicle tax is what you're paying to them to act as the executor over the vehicle. And as the executor, they can set all the policies for the vehicle. You just act as the beneficiary of the vehicle, right? But in a way, you're also the trustee. These roles change depending on what the contexts are. So for a second there, that vehicle, the trust is collapsed free and clear. And you could do that with the certificate of live birth. As a matter of fact, I planned to do that when I got arrested by the FBI and found myself indicted by a federal grand jury. I took to me at my hearings a copy, a certified copy of my certificate of live birth, where I had written on there, accepted for value, returned for value, signed it, dated it, put the social on there. And it was my plan that if things all went to hell, that I was going to throw it over the bar and say, I quit, you can have it, I don't want it anymore. That wouldn't have been really good for me, because at that point I would have had nothing by which to engage in commerce with. But quite frankly, when you're fasting time in a federal penitentiary, those kinds of thoughts go out the window. You just don't want to go to the pen. So luckily I never did that. Things worked out for me quite well, and I got one heck of an education. But we don't want to unregister the name, because if we unregister the name, we don't have a monopoly piece by which to engage in business. One of the individuals that one of the men that I talked to over the past couple days has multiple children, and none of them have certificates of birth. He never registered the kids. That's awesome. But now some of those kids are aging out, and they're wanting to go do things in commerce, and it's not going to be easy for them because they don't have a monopoly piece by which to do business. And we don't own anything. We can't do business in this system. Everything is owned by these corporations, these private corporations. A lot of them call themselves government, but everyone fears a one world system. And there is not multiple nations in this realm right now. It is all one world government. We've been under, I'm almost 50, and I've never not known a one world government. Think about it. It's all governed by the Uniform Commercial Code. All these countries are governed by central banking. They've truly established a one world government with the United Nations at the top. It's all there. All they've got to do is get us to admit it's there. Hence the whole thing with the World Economic Forum saying you own nothing and you will be happy. It's one thing to get us to fool us and think we own stuff. It's another thing to get us to recognize we own nothing, and then to not overthrow and throw nooses over light poles and hang those that are doing this to us. Well, that wouldn't be good either, because the people that are doing this to us are us. We're the ones that are giving them all the permission. What do? We go to these elections, we elect politicians, and what is the mark of a good politician? Passing more laws, more control. You cannot change the system from within the system. And by registering the name, you are stepping away from the system, but you can still interact with the system with your monopoly piece. So, I actually exited the conversation at this point with this individual. I said, this is something you need to figure out, I reckon. That's what I said. And I kind of feel bad about that because what ends up happening is folks jump into our group and they start asking questions and they're new to this stuff, but I've explained it over and over and over. And so I consulted scripture, and the response I got back was, I reckon that's not a good enough answer. If you don't know how you're registering something that's not yours, then I'm not going to trust it. That should be a fundamental thing you should know and understand about your process that you're teaching people. And my response was, well, first off, it's not a process. I'm actually encouraging folks to abide by the law. Go register the name. Now, if you look up the word process, it's anything that, here, I've got it right here, process. A series of actions, motions, or occurrences, progressive act or transaction, continuous operation, method, mode, or operation, whereby a result or effect is produced. Normal or actual course of procedure, regular proceeding, the process of vegetation or decomposition, a chemical process, processes of nature. So I say that the ANC is not a process because in my mind, a process is like the 1099A, all that crap's a process. You got this form and then this form and then register it, do this. And I mean, there's a long list of stuff you got to do. Now, if you really want to break things down and get really technical, everything's a process. Getting up and getting a glass of water is a process, but I don't think of it as that. I think of that as a single act. I think of the ANC filing as a single act. We do have a video that we've put up on it. You can find it in the group on how to appropriately register the legal name as a fictitious business entity, thereby separating yourself from the legal name.
You're talking about Jonathan's video?
Jonathan's video, yes. That was put into the group more than once and in a lot of the comments. I'm sure I'll be posting it up there again. I ought to pin it to the top. But I don't see the ANC registration as a process per se, because I could knock it out in 10 minutes at this point. He was right. It is a process, but everything we do is a process. I mean, opening up a gallon of milk and pouring yourself a glass, that's a process. It has more than one step. But in the whole context of things, I don't see the ANC process, because the ANC is 1% paperwork and 99% knowing who you are. The paperwork won't take long at all. I had the paperwork for almost a year before I figured out what to do with it, because I just really didn't dig into it. And once I knew that there was something there that resonated, but it took a little bit before I really dug into it and started seeing the golden egg that I had done. That your eyes have to be, the wool has to be removed, and you have to be able to see. And I'm sure the wool's still over my eyes for many things in this realm. But one of the things I now see is how they trick us into contracting with them, and we don't have to. Okay, but we still have to be a way to participate in commerce. And by calling yourself the name, you're putting yourself under man's law and not God's law. And once you register the name, you're removing yourself from man's law and putting yourself back under God's law. That doesn't give you license to go around breaking man's law, because man's law is a poor imitation of God's law. So if you're going to break man's law, in a lot of cases, you are going to break God's law. But there's a lot of laws that you can break that are man's laws that have nothing to do with God's laws. For instance, getting in a vehicle or a truck and proceeding down the road, traveling, driving, whatever the hell you want to call it. That's all man's laws. And we should not have to pay a fee or get a license to do that. The only reason we have to is because we volunteer. How do we volunteer? We use the certificate of live birth, and we use it illegally. Once you legally use it, once you get it legalized, once you legally register it, then it separates you from all that. And that's why a lot of you folks that are watching this video are probably going to become teachers, and I hope you do. But I will give you the words of what Jesus told us many years ago. He said, "Not many of you should become teachers, my brothers, for you know that we who teach will be judged with greater strictness." And that is true. I feel it every day when I get a little tired and I answer someone in a manner that I probably shouldn't. And I'm reminded that I'm held to a higher standard because of what I'm doing. And I don't know that I can stop what I'm doing. If the government knocked on my door right now and told me to stop what I'm doing, I most likely would not stop what I'm doing. I'm more than certain I wouldn't stop what I'm doing because I'm stubborn as a old pasture bull, and I am determined to tell people about this stuff because it can resolve a lot of their challenges. And we have a faction of folks in this realm who are out to crushingly destroy you. They're out to put you in severe debt and enslave you to their wishes. They want you to be masked. They want you to shut up. They want you to be enslaved with crushing debt. And all of it is fake. It's fictitious. It's not real, which is why I don't get into the whole 1099 thing. I don't get into the whole getting access to the public trust that was filed when your birth certificate or your social security card was created. Yes, I've looked up all those bonds. At one point, I was on the verge of printing out those bonds and using them. In 2012, I was researching a thing called original issue discount, OID. And I watched because I pulled back at the last minute. I bought a $500 laser printer and the appropriate paper to start printing these things out. And I stopped. And a few months later, all hell broke loose for me with another matter. And then when I got back into things a couple of years later, I found out that all those individuals who've been studying with me were all in prison. Some of them still. Yes, you get into their game and playing around with their fictitious money in a way that we weren't meant to, and it will cause you tons of trouble. That isn't to say that you can't prove that that mortgage is a bunch of tomfoolery and get underneath it. You can, absolutely. But if you go after it with greed and try to purchase a bunch of things using 1099 A's and OIDs, you're playing with fire, is my opinion. If somebody out there is successful at it, please show me the evidence. I'd love to see it. I'd love for it to work, but I really don't need it to. I don't. I can make value other ways, and you should be seeking to make value other ways too. Okay. We got to fly our camera there. So the last thing I'll say, one of the reasons that I'm teaching this stuff is because when I teach it, I understand better, and it makes me be a better man, a better godly man. We're told in Romans 2:21, you then who teach others, do you not teach yourself? While you preach against stealing, do you steal? I can't go out here and tell folks, hey, register your name, learn who you are, when I've not done these things. So far, I've surrendered my license. I've had some success with ANC. I removed some stuff from my credit report, not huge gains, right? I've learned a lot. I've helped a lot of folks with some things because there's a limit to the number of things that I can be exposed to as a man. Right? I mean, I'm not going to go out, register my kids in a public school, get arrested by multiple different agencies, engage in multiple different types of courts like family court and probate. But I do have skin in the game. I've not paid my mortgage in 2 weeks because I can't. Not because I don't have the money. Well, there's no money because I don't have the currency, but because I can't. It's just the same reason I couldn't renew my license. I drove on an expired license for a year and a half, 2 years because I couldn't bring myself to renew it. Just couldn't. It just feels dirty. And the day that I surrendered my license, my voluntary surrender of the entity's driver's license, I walked out into the sunshine and I never felt better. It was amazing. I reveled in the feeling that I had. It's absolutely spiritual. And to separate yourself from that entity while also leaving yourself the ability to engage in commerce, it's great. Is there going to be a time when if we separate ourselves from that entity that we can not engage in commerce? Probably. It may come. And if so, I'm not worried. God will look out for me. So if anyone has any questions, we're at 8:59. Seems like a pretty good time to stop prattling on about things. I hope I answered some questions, and I hope I put some things into the video that folks can learn from later. It helps them out. And if I've inspired any questions, throw them at me.
Jenna has a couple questions.
Ooh, let's hear a couple questions.
Yeah, just unmute yourself. And
Okay, cool. I was like, I don't want to type. Okay, so one is I applied for the passport before I came into all this stuff using the copper moonshine stills. Here, I'll turn my video on so you can say hi.
Hey,
yeah, so
hey,
hi, how's it going? So yeah, I got a letter from the State Department saying, because in the address field, I put my PO box rather than my address.
Yep.
And so I'm actually happy that they didn't process it, because now I have an opportunity to like rectify how I submit the information. And I'm wondering if the ANC would have any place with that. I gave them a COLB, a certificate of live birth, as my identity stuff, or whatever identity. So I'm going to send like an exclamatory declaration, affidavit kind of thing, like I'm not a U.S. citizen or whatever. I'm a woman. That's what I was thinking. I don't know. I'm just wondering I'm trying to brainstorm on how to best handle this opportunity that I have to get it the way I want it.
When you did your Minnesota ABA, did you use a PO box?
No, I used a residence address.
Yeah, because funny, the word resident, I think in Roman times actually meant it was the home of a government official. So think of that every time they ask us what our residence is, right? I wouldn't put too much stress into giving the information necessary to get the passport. There are folks who say that, well, you need a U.S. national passport. I don't think it matters. The passport is not an ID. It's missing three things necessary to make it an ID. It's missing a legal name. It's missing a nationality. It has a nationality as a word there, but it doesn't have a nationality. Nationality would be Canadian, American, Australian. And what they put for the nationality of U.S. passport is United States of America. That's not a nationality. It's a corporation, the United States corporation. And it's also missing a domicile. It's not ID, and they'll tell you it's not ID. And a lot of places will actually push back against using a passport. But for the most part, everyone accepts the passport, because all we're doing once we register the name, there's still all these entities out there that have been trained to look for the name and the picture, right? And if you're using a driver's license or some other form of ID, then you're IDing an entity. You're not IDing a man or a woman. We can't be ID'd. But if you use a driver's license to ID yourself after you register the name, you're actually committing fraud, because you're saying I am this legal name. But with a passport, you're not doing that. I wouldn't stress too much over it. I would just put the whatever address that you're primarily domiciled to do business with, the legal name in there.
Okay. I have a question.
Okay. And you had another question, Jenna?
The other question was, it's kind of, oh yeah. So I was actually thinking about, I heard the IRS is hiring 87,000 new agents, and I was like, I know I can't mix them, right? I know private's private and leave that behind closed doors, but I thought it might be a good experience. Like I have a advanced degree, university degree and stuff. And so I was wondering, for people that want to work in the public realm and get a job or whatever, how would you recommend go about doing that?
Well, I have a theory on the whole hiring of 87,000 IRS agents. You'll remember about a year or so ago, there was a debacle about the IRS burning, deleting, shredding about 35 million returns.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah. Here's what I think happened. I have no proof of this. This is just from the mouth of Bill. I think that a lot more folks are registering the name, and the IRS works mostly off automation. Those notices that you get, I interacted with the IRS for about a year and a half in 2012, 2013, 2011, because I stopped paying taxes in 2009. I just stopped filing, which that's not the way to go about it, by the way. And so for several of those years, I did have reportable income, but I knew nothing about what I know now. And so I was breaking the law. I was. And so I think what is happening is they're sending out these automated, because nothing in the system, like if you go to the bank, and in the bank, big enough bank that it has a branch in Minnesota, and you say, I want to open an account, a business account, they can check through the bank system the certificate number that you give them for your Minnesota registration. They can check that, because these banks are all connected to the states that they're in. They're connected to the Secretary of State's websites. So I said, well, you can actually go to the Secretary of State's website on your browser and just enter that. In fact, she said, no. She says, our bank, this girl that was working with me said, our bank has to be able to see that. And we don't have a branch in Minnesota. So we can't see that. We have to verify it another way, or you have to go get legal to do business in this state, and we are connected in this state. The bank I went to was also connected to the states of West Virginia and Tennessee. So if I had done a DBA in any of those states, they could open an account for me. Now, I think there's another way around that, but basically what that shows us is that they are connected to those databases, but there's nothing set up that lets the IRS know, hey, Jenna has registered the name. She's out of the system now. We should not be sending her these things. And we're sending them anyway. And they were opening themselves up to massive liability. One of the things I found out in 2012 is that when I got an automated notice, there was a name on it of a person, first and last name. I had some contacts during that time within the government where I could, because I used to do background investigations and other investigative work for the feds. And I spent time in just about every federal agency you can imagine. I had a few contacts. I couldn't find any of these people. They don't exist. When they put the name Jenna Johnson on a automated notice, Jenna Johnson doesn't work for the IRS. She's not there. And the reason is they're protecting themselves from liability. They're not there. You'll never find them. You go knock on the doors, get them to let you in, and walk to each and every individual that works in there. You will not find Jenna Johnson. So I think what happened when they got rid of all those returns, I think they were scrambling to cover their butts because they are waking up. They are learning this stuff. And I'm sure there's a lot of folks out there I've not yet met that are doing and engaging and learning this stuff. Douglas Heerich was the first one to figure it out in 2015, but he swears he wasn't the first because he saw the laws changing over a 15 or 20 year period, the assumed name laws in each state, and they closed the doors in every state but Minnesota. So they didn't want us to discover this stuff. The system isn't set up for us to do this, but they still have to leave us an out. I think they're hiring these 87,000 people because they need to move back from automation and they need more people with eyes on things so that they're reading the document that we send them. And it's just not because if you ignore the automated notices, it keeps escalating until you do have somebody you ignore. And at that point, they've opened themselves up to massive liability if they knock on my door because they don't have any type of corporate veil protecting them. If an IRS agent knocks on my door and violates me, he's liable. I can leave him standing out in front of his house with his family wondering what happened because I'm a man, not a person, and I can use my monopoly piece to get remedy. And so I think that's why. As far as what you should do, if are you talking about in the context of an employee or a contractor? Are you going to be 1099 or
I was going either way. I don't really care, but you have to go through USA Jobs and upload your, my transcripts. And I was like, should I upload my ANC too? And like, let them know I registered the name. My resume, like,
right. I probably wouldn't do that with the resume. Okay. So when it comes to taxes, here's what's going on. Okay. When I went to get a bank account, they asked me what kind of business I am. And the only one that makes sense, and even this one isn't quite right because the system isn't set up for us folks. Not entirely. It kind of is, but there's still some limitations. So they had different business entities listed. Are you an LLC or you a corporation? Sole proprietor is what I chose. Okay. Now,
right.
So I had looked this up because I knew I was going to get this question when I opened up the account. A sole proprietor, if you look on the IRS website, for tax purposes is a pass-through entity. The tax liability and the income passes through to the individual. Of course, once you file the Minnesota DBA, the individual is no longer there. Right. So what you're going to want to do is, if you're filling out a W-4, when you fill out the W-4, there is I helped someone fill out a W-4 a few weeks ago, and I don't quite remember it, but I remember laughing because it was blaringly obvious that there was an out there. I think in the previous W-4s from other years, more obscure, it asked, do you have any tax liability for this year? And did you have tax liability last year? Right. And if you select no, there'll be no withholding.
Right.
Now they'll still withhold Social Security and maybe one other, but you can get rid of that withholding too, but probably don't care because it's very small. And maybe one of these days you'll choose to use Social Security, but the majority of tax burden will be gone. And at that point, you should not file a tax return because how the hell would you sign it? you can't sign it with the signature of the first, middle, last name, because that would be perjury in itself.
Yeah.
You don't know the name. And individual no longer applies to you, because how does an individual file tax returns? Well, they do a 1040. What's 1040? It's an individual tax return. So you're no longer an individual. So
Right.
you would just not file. And I think that you should file any tax return, and I'm covering my butt here a little bit, that you're obligated to file. The question
Right.
would be, are you obligated to file once you register the name? And I know
Exactly.
folks who, folks contacted the IRS and asked them this question. And one guy, even Douglas Erich, actually says that he got a hold of someone who said, "You're right, but at this point, I can no longer talk to you." So there you go.
Okay.
For what it's worth, I can look at a duck and call it a duck, and I know what the term individual means in a legal sense, and I'm not an individual. So what is an individual? An individual is a man or woman who's using an unregistered legal name. That's an individual. They've set the system up. Yeah, they've set the system up for folks to illegally use the name. They've set the system up for folks to break the law, and they will encourage you to break the law. But we shouldn't.
Got it.
It doesn't make it right, and it still incurs tons of liability, right? Now, as
Yeah.
for a contractor, I don't think you fill out anything to be a contractor. To be a contractor, you just give them your social security number and your legal name, and they're the ones that report your income on a 1099. But what you should do before you do that is there's some paperwork you should send the IRS. And one of those is a notice to cease and desist. And the other one is a status correction to change you in their system from a decedent to a non-decedent. I would probably also include the live life claim. And more than likely tomorrow or the next day, I'm going to upload some documents to the group.
That was my next question. Yeah. The live life claim and all that. Next steps.
Yeah, the live life claim you're going to send to about 9 or 10 different agencies. And I may add a few more to my list because there's a few state agencies I want to include too. And so I would encourage you to use the documents that I upload as a template, but to make up your own. I'm not of the same principles go into. I'm a big fan of making your own documents. So
Absolutely. My own equity, put it in there. Yeah. I got it on that part.
So at that point, I mean, for you, there's no way for you, because I tried filing a tax return in 2012 and I didn't sign it because it said under penalty of perjury. And I looked up the word perjury because I had a Black's Law Dictionary at that point, which why we're not given these when we turn, I don't know, 12, we should be given a Black Dictionary 12. But because we need to learn their fictitious language, right? Because we're participating in their fictitious system.
Right.
But I looked at the word perjury and I was like, oh, hell, don't want to do that. And so I sent them a check and I sent them the return and it was all filled out. It was with the W-2s or whatever they send you to report your income. I included it all and they sent the darn thing back and said, you forgot to sign it. And I included a note that said, no, I didn't forget to sign it. I'm just not going to sign it. And they sent it back and said, well, you have to sign it. I said, oh, I'm not going to sign it. Here's your check. Take your money. That's cool. They wouldn't take it. They sent it back. They would not accept it. We have to agree. Why do you think they want you to vote? Voting ain't about who gets elected. Hell, I'm pretty sure that the governor is appointed by the Secretary of State. I don't even think it's an electable.
It's just your consent.
It's all consent. We consent constantly. You go renew your driver's license. You could have had the damn thing for 50 years. And what do they ask? Are you a U.S. citizen? They want your consent. Do you still give us governance over your body and your soul? Oh, yes, I do, because I am afraid to do anything other than that. And so we have to consent. So as an independent contractor, you should have already sent in your live life claim. And then, don't be afraid of them. I mean,
I'm not afraid of them. I just want to interact with them,
honorably, right?
Honorably, exactly. Yeah.
And the great thing about being an independent contractor is there isn't a big fight over withholding, right? Although the folks I've talked to who don't have withholding, I know a guy that makes $165,000 a year or so, and he just took on a new job, and from day one, he never had withholding. He gave them the appropriate paperwork. He filled out the W-5, 4 or whatever it is. And I probably ought to go print one of those off and dig into it a little bit further. We'll make this into a meeting at one. But He
Cool.
doesn't file a tax return. He hasn't filed a tax return in a couple of years. He's not made a mortgage payment in 2 years. He's not made a car payment in 2 years. He still has the use of all those things. He is engaged in a federal lawsuit with the bank, but he's having a blast with it. The judge actually dismissed his case this past week, but in doing so, in the dismissal, he explained to him exactly what he did to refile an amended claim. He actually told him in his claim or in his dismissal everything that he needed to see in the next one, and he dismissed it without prejudice. Yeah, I think these judges actually they want us to succeed. I think a lot of these judges do. I stood in
Yep.
front of a federal judge, and when I started talking to the judge, which is not kosher, I just started doing it. My attorney was kicking me under the seat, and the judge started talking to me. And on the way out the courtroom, my attorney looked at me and said, "What in the heck was that?" And I said, "Oh, you don't know? Like, you don't understand what was being said?" And he said, "No." And this guy had been handling federal cases for 15 years. We went back to his office, and since he was still billing the federal government, he was a court-appointed attorney, a public defender. And we had probably a good 3.5 hour session with a whiteboard. And I explained things to him that I knew at that time. And he sat back and said, "That stuff makes sense." But I saw it in the judge's eyes when I started talking the judge's language, because federal judges in particular are masters of contract. They are masters at it. You do not want to take on a federal judge until you've exceeded a really good level of contracting. Well, and really know who you are. Well, I saw it in his face. Like, these guys see people come in every day. They know what's going on with democracy. They know what they're doing. They know that democracy always leads to chaos. And I don't think they want to see it happen.
I was in court a couple months ago, and the judge, these poor souls that didn't know what was happening, they just started to open their mouth. He's like, "No, no, no, don't say anything." Like, he was like
Trying to
trying
help
to
them
help
out.
them out.
Wow.
Anything.
Yeah. So
He
don't always
didn't
look
want
at
them to make a.
yeah. Don't always look at the judge as your enemy, because a lot of the
Yeah.
folks really.
Okay, Abby has a question.
What you
Yeah, I want
got,
to know what
Abby?
Abby had. Thank you so much.